With the release of Shadow of the Erdtree, we have been blessed with many more powerful weapons, all with some unique Ashes of Wars and abilities that can also break the entire game. Today, I want to focus on one of the new colossal weapons, because if you make the right build around it, you will not only be able to do thousands of damage, but you will also have over 200 bleed proc, meaning that you proc bleed every other hit. So yes, it's safe to say that this build is truly devastating, so let's just jump straight into it. Now, for those of you wondering, the weapon in question today is none other than the Bloodfiend's arm, and I'm sure for those of you that have been invested into the DLC over the weekend, it's not going to be the first time that you've heard this weapon's name. Like I mentioned in the intro, it's a brand new colossal weapon that you can get almost instantly in the DLC, and not only does it have similar colossal weapon properties like having brilliant stance damage and base damage to begin with, but if you fully upgrade the weapon and turn the affinity into a blood affinity, you'll actually have a B rated scaling in Arcane, and where it has a B scaling in Arcane, that means you can get the bleed proc past 200 just by simply having around 50 Arcane in your build. Of course, I'll come to the stats in a moment, but of course, to get your hands on this weapon, like I said earlier, you can get it almost immediately, because all you simply need to do is make your way to the main gate cross Site of Grace, and then if you head back on yourself as if you're going back to the beginning area, you will notice that on the right hand side of the cliff there's like a little path you can take, and by taking that path you will end up at the Cliff Road terminus Site of Grace, which just in front of that is the Prospect Town, where there are a bunch of enemies wielding this weapon. Of course, the enemies in question are going to be the Bloodfiends themselves, and as I say, there is an abundance of them both in and around the outskirts of this town. Also, just to let you know, there are two types of different Bloodfiend enemies, one of which is going to be carrying the spear, which of course is not what we want, and the other one is of course carrying the arm, which is the weapon we do want. So just make sure you're farming the Bloodfiends carrying the massive colossal weapon, which is of course the arm, and make sure that you bring all the item discovery boosts like the Silver Scarab Talisman, the Silver Mask, and even some Silver Pickled Fouled Foot, and you should be able to get this weapon no problems at all. And then essentially, once you've got this weapon in your hands, go and level it up to its maximum level and infuse it with a different Ash of War. I personally chose Cragblade because with the Cragblade Ash of War, not only are we going to be getting a plus 15% boost to our overall damage with this weapon, but we also get a plus 10% boost to our poise damage, which also makes this weapon even more deadly, because essentially if you don't break your enemy's poise in the first charged heavy attack, you will then break it with the second. But no matter what Ash of War you put on the weapon, just make sure you turn it into a blood variant, because that is how you're going to have the insane bleed proc put on this weapon. And again, like I mentioned before, essentially with every other charged heavy attack that you do with this weapon, you will be proccing bleed. That is because with the charged heavy attacks with this weapon, although they are going to be right in front of you, so the range isn't the best, it will do a small AoE attack, again doing blood splatters, increasing the bleed damage that you do with this weapon. That is essentially what makes this weapon so stupidly overpowered, but even against enemies like Elden beasts that are resistant to bleed, with the heightened poise damage and just the insane base damage that this weapon does, it's still extremely viable pretty much in every single fight you take this into. But of course, you're going to need to know the stats to mimic the build that I'm showing you on screen, and as per usual with all of our builds on this channel, it is going to be a level 150 character, and as you can see, we've got 50 vigor, 18 mind, 26 endurance, 20 strength, which I know is less than what's required on this weapon, but I'll explain that in a moment, 11 dexterity, 10 intelligence, 25 faith, and then 69 arcane. Of course, like I mentioned, strength is at 20, because although you actually require 28 strength to wield the weapon correctly, by two-handing we give ourselves a plus 50% in our strength stats, where we've got 20. If we two-hand the weapon, we give ourselves an extra 10 points in strength, which totals 30, which of course is enough to wield the weapon correctly. 11 dexterity again is the minimum requirement for this weapon. 10 intelligence is my base stat, as I am a wretch build, so do not put anything into intelligence. But of course, where we turn this weapon into a blood affinity, the best scaling stat is arcane, and that also tremendously boosts our bleed build up, which is how we obviously get it as high as 220 onwards. But just for a bit of advice, if you are taking this build into the DLC, I do recommend improving the level of your character a little bit, even if it is just to level 100 175 or even 200, because the DLC can be a little bit hard. I believe there was actually an update earlier today that has actually buffed the rate that your stats increase with the Shadow Tree fragments, but even still, with a level 150 build with a Shadow Tree blessing of around about 15 or 16, the final boss fight can still be a little bit tricky. So as I say, if you want to pump up the stats a little bit more with this build, feel free to do so. Obviously get your arcane to 80, as that will reach the final soft cap for the bleed build up and also just the scaling on the weapon. But then I would also highly recommend increasing your vigor a bit more so that you can actually survive a little bit longer in the fights, as well as your endurance to use much heavier armor sets, so again you can survive a little bit longer and obviously run this weapon and those heavier armor sets whilst remaining in at least a medium roll. But essentially 150 is enough to beat the DLC, as I have personally done it. But no matter what stats you're using, whether they're higher, lower, or exactly the same as the ones I've shown you in this video, we of course need to delve into the talismans, and where we're focusing on charged heavy attacks, the first one that I highly recommend that you run is indeed going to be the Axe Talisman. But again, where we're going to be a bit more up close and personal and possibly trading hits every now and again, I do also recommend running the Dragon Crest Great Shield, especially if you're running a lighter armor set, as again that will just help you tremendously survive those trades if you do end up trading hits. Then I also recommend running the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, where we're going to be proccing bleed so easily, so quickly, you will be getting the plus 20% extra damage boost whenever that does occur. And then for the final talisman, we're actually going to be using a new talisman, again from the DLC, which is going to be the Two-Handed Sword Talisman. Now again, just to give you a quick rundown on how to get this, it is actually located in the Temple Town Ruins, and just to show you very quickly on the map, if you come from the Morph Ruins Site of Grace, so after beating Rolana, and head to this lake that is just northeast, you will be able to take a path down to the Ancient Ruins Base Site of Grace, and then essentially from there it's just a straight shot down the canyon to the Temple Town Ruins, and in those ruins at the very top will be a chest with this talisman inside. This talisman will give us a plus 15% extra damage boost whenever we are two-handing a weapon, and where we need to two-hand the weapon to use it correctly, you will essentially be having this boost active at all times. But if you don't have this talisman yet, feel free to use something like the Ritual Swords Talisman, as again that will give you an extra damage boost whenever you're at full HP, or possibly even something like the Tree's Favor to give you more HP and more endurance to allow you to of course run a heavier armor set. But talking about the armor set, some of you are probably very keen-eyed and notice that one of the items in our armor set is actually again boosting the damage that we deal, which is indeed going to be the White Mask. That again will give us a plus 10% damage boost whenever a bleed proc occurs, which will be happening every other second with this weapon. But then I finished off the look with the Normadics Merchant's Finery along with Scaled Gauntlets and Greaves to give me the best defense possible realistically, whilst keeping myself in a medium weight gain to allow me to at least medium roll everywhere. But like I say, this armor set isn't the best for protection, so do just obviously bear that in mind if you do want to copy the look. The only thing that you really need to keep on is the helm, as like I say, you'll get the extra 10% damage boost whenever bleed occurs. But just to sort of finalize the build and give you the last buffs that you're going to need for it, in the Wonder Physick, I do highly recommend running the Spiked Cracked tier and the Stone Barb Cracked tier, as again you'll get a second boost to your charged heavy attacks, as well as getting a 30% boost to your poise damage, which is again how we're beating most of these bosses and breaking their poises with 2 or 3 hits. Then where we have 25 faith in the build, that also allows us to run both Golden Vow and the Flame Grant Me Strength incantations to again give us additional damage boost as well as damage negation, and also a little bit of stamina regen too. And then essentially with all of those combined, that will allow you to use this weapon and deal the thousands and tens of thousands of damage that you're seeing being dealt on screen. And I must say, this might possibly now be the best colossal weapon in the game. I am almost certain that this will get nerfed at some point, at least if they just alter the scaling from a B to a C so it doesn't do as much bleed build up. So if you have got your hands on the DLC and you're looking for a new overpowered weapon to just rinse through it super quickly, definitely pick up this weapon. It truly is an absolute monster, which is why I wanted to make this video on it, because I see a lot of you still commenting that you're struggling with the final boss fight, and I must say this build paired with a Mimic tier makes the final boss an absolute joke. And that of course is why I am calling this the ultimate Bloodfiend Arms build. So yeah, there you have it. That is how you create the ultimate Bloodfiend's Arms build. Of course, feel free to mimic this build, go and use it for yourself, and like I mentioned with the stats, feel free to go up even further because the DLC is a little unforgiving, especially the final fight. So honestly, do what you can to make that as easy as possible for yourselves, and don't be like me getting stuck on the boss fight for about 5 hours before finding out that this weapon exists. Of course, there are also many other weapons that are just as good as this, but maybe even some that are better, and we are going to be covering a load more builds going forward. So if you want to stay up to date with all of those when they first release and all of the crazy live streams that we're going through, then feel free to subscribe to the channel. And if this build has helped you out in any way, or you enjoyed the video in any way, then I hope you don't mind me asking you to leave a like rating on this video. It helps out the channel tremendously, and it's the quickest and easiest way to tell me that you enjoy these crazy overpowered builds and you want to see more of them in the future. But other than that, I have said pretty much everything I need to say about this weapon and this build. Go and use it for yourself. Let me know how you get on if you do happen to use it. But other than that, thank you so much for obviously watching this video. I hope you're having an amazing day so far, but I guess I'll catch you in the next video of whatever it is that we make. Bye bye.